7 winters of peace. That's what Kjartan had built with his own 2 hands. 7 winters without blood on his axe, without screams in his dreams, without the taste of iron on his tongue, and in one single night, the gods would tear it all away. They called him Kjartan the Quiet now. The fisherman of Valdholm had given him that name because he rarely spoke, rarely drank at the Great Hall, rarely raised his voice even when the merchants tried to cheat him at the docks. But Kjartan had not always been quiet. There was a time when men spoke his true name with fear, when jarls paid silver to keep him away from their shores. That man was supposed to be dead. Kjartan had buried him in the frozen ground of the north, along with his sword and his past. He had a small farm now, a modest fishing boat, and a daughter named Eira, who had just seen her 6th summer. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and Kjartan had sworn on her grave that Eira would never know the man he used to be. She would know only the fisherman, only the father who braided her hair and told her stories of seal folk and hidden treasures. That night, Kjartan was mending nets by the fire when he heard the sound. A groan, low and animal, coming from the tree line beyond his farm. He grabbed his gutting knife and walked into the darkness, expecting a wounded deer or perhaps a wolf caught in a hunter's trap. What he found was a man. The stranger lay crumpled against an oak tree, clutching his stomach where a wound had opened him from ribs to hip. His beard was matted with blood, his eyes wild with the fever of the dying. But it was his arms that made Kjartan stop cold. They were covered in ritual scars, dozens of them, layered over muscle thick as ship rope, and around his neck hung an iron pendant shaped like a wolf's head with ruby eyes. A berserker. One of Odin's mad wolves. The most feared warriors in all the northern lands. Kjartan knew he should walk away. Berserkers brought death wherever they went. They were weapons of jarls and kings, pointed at enemies and unleashed without mercy. Whatever battle this one had fled, whatever enemies had given him that wound, they would come looking. They always did. But then the berserker opened his eyes and looked at Kjartan. Not with rage, not with the killing madness, with something that looked almost like peace. Water, the man whispered. Or mead, if the gods are kind. Kjartan thought of his daughter sleeping in the house behind him. He thought of the 7 winters of peace. He thought of the grave where he had buried his old self. And then he went inside and brought the dying man his last horn of mead. He sat with the berserker until dawn, feeding him sips of honey wine and listening to his labored breathing. The man's name was Vigo, called the Blood Drunk by those who had seen him fight. He had served Jarl Grimvald of the Iron Coast for 12 years, had killed more men than he could count, had never once questioned an order, until 3 days ago, when Grimvald commanded him to burn a village of farmers who could not pay their tribute. Women, Vigo whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. Children. He wanted me to kill children. He had refused, and Grimvald's own guards had opened him with their swords for his disobedience. You will die, Kjartan said quietly. No healer can close that wound. Vigo smiled, showing teeth stained red. I know, but I will die with mead on my lips and a clear sky above. That is more than I deserve. He gripped Kjartan's wrist with surprising strength. You have a kind heart, fisherman. Guard it. In these lands, kindness is a blade that cuts the one who wields it. By sunrise, Vigo the Blood Drunk was dead. Kjartan buried him on the hill overlooking the sea, where the warrior's spirit could watch the waves. He spoke no words over the grave because he did not know what to say to the gods who collected such broken men. He simply placed the wolf pendant on the mound and walked back to his life. 28 days later, his daughter woke him with a scream. Kjartan ran outside and looked toward the horizon. His blood turned to ice. 12 Drakkars were cutting through the morning mist, their sails bearing the sigil of a wolf's head with ruby eyes. And at the prow of the lead ship stood a giant of a man with a silver beard, staring directly at Kjartan's farm. They had come. Grimvald had come. And Kjartan the Quiet realized that some graves refused to stay closed. Before we continue, if you want to discover what happened to Kjartan, leave your like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming. Kjartan moved without thinking. He grabbed Eira, wrapped her in a fur cloak, and ran to the back of the farm where old Magnus kept his horses. Magnus was a drunk and a fool, but he owed Kjartan 3 favors, and today Kjartan would collect all of them at once. "Take her to the monastery on the eastern ridge," Kjartan commanded, placing his confused daughter in Magnus's arms. "Tell the monks she is an orphan. Tell them her father is dead." "Papa?" Eira's voice was small, frightened. "Papa, where are you going?" Kjartan knelt before her, memorizing her face. The way her mother's eyes looked back at him, the small scar on her chin from when she had fallen chasing geese, every detail that he might never see again. "I am going to speak with some men," he said softly, "important men who came a long way. Will you come back?" He could not lie to her. He had never lied to her. So he simply kissed her forehead and whispered, "Run now, and remember that your father loved you more than the sea loves the shore." Magnus rode hard toward the eastern mountains, and Kjartan watched until his daughter disappeared into the tree line. Only then did he return to his house and kneel before the loose stone in his floor. Beneath it lay a bundle wrapped in oiled leather, untouched for 7 years. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it. The sword was still sharp. The handle still fit his palm, like it had been carved for him. Because it had been. He had commissioned it himself in another life, paid for it with blood money from a raid he tried to forget. They called this blade Winter's End, because those who faced it never saw another spring. Kjartan walked to the shore alone, sword at his hip, as the first of the Drakkars ran aground on the sand. Warriors poured off the ships, hundreds of them, their armor gleaming and their axes hungry. At their head strode the silver-bearded giant, Jarl Grimvald of the Iron Coast. He was enormous, nearly 7 feet tall, with arms like oak branches and a face carved from granite and cruelty. His cloak was made from a white bear's pelt, and at his belt hung a war hammer that had caved in the skulls of chieftains and kings alike. Grimvald stopped 10 paces from Kjartan and studied him like a man examining a strange insect. "You are the one," the Jarl said. It was not a question. "The fisherman who buried my berserker." "I gave a dying man his final drink," Kjartan replied. "I did not know he was yours. Everything is mine." Grimvald's voice carried no anger, only the absolute certainty of a man who had never been refused. "The berserker was mine. The secrets he carried were mine. His life and his death were mine to decide. And you stole them." "I stole nothing. He was already dying when I found him." "He told you things." Grimvald stepped closer, and his warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. "In his final hours, the blood drunk spoke to you. He told you why I ordered his death. He told you about the village, about my commands, about my plans for the eastern territories." The Jarl's eyes narrowed. "What else did he tell you, fisherman?" Kjartan understood then. This was not about revenge for a dead warrior. Grimvald did not care about Vigo. He cared about information, about witnesses, about loose threads that could unravel his ambitions. The Jarl was planning something dark enough that he had ordered his own berserker killed to keep it secret. And now Kjartan was a loose thread. "He told me nothing of value," Kjartan said carefully. "Only that he had disobeyed an order and paid the price." "You lie." "I have no reason to lie." Grimvald smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf circling wounded prey. "Every man has a reason to lie. Fear, greed, love." He glanced toward the farm, toward the empty yard where Eira had played just that morning. "I am told you have a daughter, fisherman. A pretty little thing with her mother's eyes." Something ancient and terrible stirred in Kjartan's chest, the thing he had buried 7 years ago, the thing that had made Jarls pay silver to keep him away. "My daughter is not part of this. Your daughter is whatever I decide she is." Grimvald waved a hand, and 20 warriors began moving toward the farmhouse. "Find the girl. Bring her to me. We will see how well the fisherman's memory improves when his child is—" He never finished the sentence. Winter's End sang through the air and opened Grimvald's throat before anyone could react. The Jarl staggered backward, clutching the wound that had transformed his voice into a wet gurgle. His eyes were wide, disbelieving, as if he could not comprehend that a mere fisherman had dared to strike him. Kjartan caught him before he fell and whispered in his ear, "My name is not Fisherman. My name is Kjartan Doombringer, the ghost of the northern raids, and I have killed better men than you for lesser threats." He let the Jarl fall and turned to face 600 warriors alone. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. 600 battle-hardened Vikings stared at the fisherman who had just cut their Jarl's throat, and the fisherman stared back with eyes that held no fear. Only calculation. Only the cold arithmetic of violence that he had learned in 100 raids and thought he had forgotten. Then the first warrior charged, and Kjartan became someone else. Winter's End moved like water, like wind, like the inevitable turning of seasons. The first man lost his sword arm at the elbow. The second took the blade through his eye. The third and fourth came together, and Kjartan dropped beneath their swings, hamstrung them both, and was moving before their screams began. He was not fighting. Fighting implied effort, uncertainty, the possibility of defeat. This was something else entirely. This was harvest. This was a farmer cutting wheat. 20 men fell in the first minute, 30 more in the second. The sand turned red, then black, as blood soaked into the earth and warriors began to realize what they were facing. This was no fisherman. This was no man at all. This was a force of nature wearing human skin. "Fall back!" someone screamed. "Fall back to the ships." But it was too late for that. The warriors near the shore found their path blocked by a wall of their own dead. Those who tried to flank Kjartan discovered that he seemed to know where they would be before they arrived, his blade always waiting, always hungry, always precise. 53 men died before Kjartan took his first wound, a shallow cut across his ribs from a spear he had not seen. The pain was distant, irrelevant, a distraction he filed away for later consideration. His body was a machine now, operating on instincts carved into his bones through years of brutal training and endless slaughter. He had been born on a farm much like this one, the son of a thrall and a raider who never acknowledged him. At 12, he had killed his first man defending his mother from a drunken warrior. At 14, he had been sold to a war band that specialized in impossible missions, suicidal raids, the kind of violence that broke ordinary men. They had forged him in blood and fire until nothing human remained. For 15 years, Kjartan Doombringer had been the shadow that Jarls whispered about, the assassin who could not be stopped, the ghost who appeared from nowhere, killed whoever needed killing, and vanished before the bodies cooled. He had murdered chieftains in their beds. He had ended bloodlines. He had done things that still visited him in nightmares. And then he had met Eira's mother, and everything changed. She had been a healer in a village he was supposed to destroy. Instead of burning her home, he had fallen to his knees and wept, and she had held him like a child until the madness passed. For 3 years, she had slowly reassembled his humanity, teaching him that he could be more than a weapon. When she died giving birth to their daughter, Kjartan had sworn to honor her memory. He had buried Doombringer in the frozen ground, taken his child, and fled to the most remote village he could find. 7 winters of peace. 7 winters of pretending to be someone else. All of it, gone in a single morning. By the time the battle ended, 97 warriors lay dead on the beach. The survivors had retreated to their ships, but they had not fled. They were regrouping, waiting, watching the blood-soaked figure standing alone among the corpses. Kjartan's arms burned. His ribs screamed where the spear had caught him. But it was his heart that hurt the most, because he knew this was only the beginning. A horn sounded from the lead Drakkar, and a new figure emerged. A woman this time, tall and regal, with silver hair braided with iron rings and a cloak of raven feathers. She walked across the bloody sand without hesitation, without fear, until she stood before Kjartan. "Doombringer," she said. I wondered if the legends were true. Kjartan raised his sword, but the woman did not flinch. "I am Ragnhild, widow of Grimvald, and as of this moment, ruler of the Iron Coast." Her eyes held his with unnerving intensity. "My husband was a monster. You have done me a favor by killing him. Now I offer you a choice. I do not negotiate with those who threaten my daughter. Your daughter was never in danger from me." Ragnhild smiled coldly. "Grimvald's orders, not mine. The men who went to your farm have been recalled. I have different plans for you, Doombringer." She gestured toward the horizon, toward the east where dark smoke was rising from multiple points along the coast. "War is coming, a great war. The southern kingdoms have allied against us, and they march with 20,000 swords. My husband's death has left our forces in chaos. I need a general. I need a legend." Her gaze hardened. "I need you." Kjartan looked at the smoke on the horizon, at the bodies at his feet, at the sword in his hand that still dripped with blood. 7 winters of peace. And the gods had decided it was time to pay the debt. 3 weeks later, Kjartan stood on the walls of Jarnborg, the iron fortress, watching 5,000 warriors train in the fields below. They moved in formations he had designed, practiced maneuvers he had invented, prepared for a war he had never wanted to fight. Ragnhild had been true to her word. Eira was safe at the monastery, protected by 50 of the queen's personal guards. In exchange, Kjartan had agreed to lead the defense against the Southern Alliance. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself that once the war was won, he would take his daughter and disappear to some distant land where no one knew his name. He almost believed it. "You are brooding again." Ragnhild appeared beside him, her raven cloak rippling in the wind. "It does not suit you. I am counting the men who will die because of decisions I make. That is war. That is murder with better organization." The queen studied him with those unreadable eyes. In the weeks since Grimvald's death, Kjartan had learned that Ragnhild was far more dangerous than her husband had ever been. Where Grimvald had ruled through brute force, she ruled through intelligence, manipulation, and an absolute unwillingness to lose. "The Southern Alliance reaches our border in 12 days, she said. "Their commander is King Hakon the Silver-Tongued, and he has never lost a campaign. He conquered the Amber Coast in 3 months. He broke the Frost clans in 6 weeks. His armies are disciplined, well-supplied, and utterly loyal. I know. I have studied his battles. Then you know we cannot win through conventional means." Kjartan had known it from the moment he saw the intelligence reports. The Southern Alliance outnumbered them 4-1. Their cavalry was superior. Their siege equipment was advanced. In a direct confrontation, the Iron Coast would be crushed within a month. "We do not need to win," he said slowly. "We need to make victory cost more than they are willing to pay." "Explain." Over the next hour, Kjartan outlined his strategy. They would not meet the Southern Army in open battle. Instead, they would retreat, drawing the enemy deeper into their territory. They would burn their own crops, poison their own wells, leave nothing behind but scorched earth and empty villages. The Southerners would have to bring all their supplies from home, stretching their lines across hundreds of miles of hostile terrain. And then, when they were tired, hungry, and far from reinforcement, Kjartan would strike. "Raids," he said. "Constant, relentless raids. We hit their supply wagons at night. We kill their scouts. We ambush their foraging parties. We never give them a moment's peace. By the time they reach Jarnborg, they will be half starved and half mad." Ragnhild considered this. "It means sacrificing our own people, the farmers, the villages in the enemy's path. We evacuate who we can. The rest..." Kjartan paused, tasting the bitterness of his own words. "The rest is the price of survival. You have done this before." It was not a question. Kjartan did not answer. That night, alone in his chambers, he finally allowed himself to think about what he was becoming. 7 years ago, he had sworn to never take another life. 7 years ago, he had promised Eira's mother that her death would mean something, that their daughter would grow up in a world without bloodshed. Now he was planning a campaign that would kill thousands, friend and enemy alike, innocents and warriors. All because a dying berserker had wanted one last taste of Mead. The cruelest part was that Kjartan was good at this. Better than good. His mind mapped battlefields the way a musician heard melodies. He could look at a map and see exactly where to strike, when to retreat, how to turn weakness into strength. It was a gift, and like all gifts from the gods, it came with a terrible price. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. One of Ragnhild's guards entered with a message. "The scouts have returned, my lord. They bring news from the southern army." Kjartan read the report twice, his blood chilling with each word. King Håkon had changed his strategy. Instead of marching directly toward Jarnborg, he was splitting his forces. One army would continue the main advance. The other, 10,000 strong, was circling north toward the mountains, toward the monastery where Eira was hidden. What would you do in Kjartan's place? Protect his daughter or defend the realm? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if you haven't liked yet, now's the time. Kjartan rode through the night, alone, pushing his horse until foam gathered at its mouth. Behind him, the Iron Coast prepared for war. Ahead of him, 10,000 enemies marched toward his daughter. He had left Ragnhild a message explaining nothing. She would consider it a betrayal, and perhaps it was. Perhaps he was abandoning 5,000 warriors who trusted him to lead them. Perhaps he was dooming an entire kingdom to conquest and slavery. But Eira was 6 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, and Kjartan would burn the entire world to ash before he let anyone touch her. He reached the monastery on the third day, his horse dead beneath him for the final mile. The holy men found him collapsed at their gates, half frozen and delirious with exhaustion. When he woke, the abbot was standing over him with a grave expression. "Your daughter is safe, warrior, but she has been asking for you." Kjartan found Eira in the monastery's garden, playing with wooden dolls that the monks had carved for her. She saw him and her face lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Papa!" He caught her in his arms and held her so tightly that she squeaked in protest. She smelled like pine needles and honey. She was warm and alive and real. "You came back," she whispered. "You promised you would come back." "I will always come back." His voice cracked on the words. Always. But even as he held her, Kjartan's mind was calculating distances and speeds. The southern army would reach the monastery in 5 days. The mountain passes were narrow enough to defend, but he was one man against 10,000. The monks were scholars, not warriors. There was no one to stand beside him. Unless. The idea came to him like a thunderbolt. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was probably impossible. He was going to do it anyway. Over the next 4 days, Kjartan transformed the monastery into a death trap. He taught the monks to create avalanches using carefully positioned rocks. He mapped every cliff face, every narrow path, every choke point where a single man could hold off an army. He positioned oil and fire at strategic points along the main route, and then he did something he had not done in 7 years. He prayed, not to Odin, who collected warriors for his eternal battles, not to Thor, who blessed those who fought with strength. He prayed to Freya, goddess of love and death, who understood that sometimes the greatest courage was found in protecting what you cherished. "Let me save her," he whispered. "Take whatever you want from me. My life, my soul, my name. Just let me save her." The southern army arrived at dawn on the 5th day, their banners stretching across the valley like a river of silk. At their head rode a commander in silver armor, his face hidden behind a helm shaped like a snarling wolf. Kjartan stood alone at the mouth of the pass, his sword drawn, his body positioned so that the rising sun was at his back. "I am Kjartan Doombringer," he roared. "I killed Jarl Grimvald and 97 of his warriors in a single morning. I am the ghost of the northern raids, the shadow of death, the man who ended the bloodline of the Frost Kings." He pointed Winter's End at the army below. "This pass is closed. Any man who enters will not leave alive." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the commander in silver armor removed his helm and laughed. "Doombringer," he called back. "I have heard the stories. I was hoping to meet you." He drew his own sword, a massive blade that gleamed like moonlight. "I am Eric, called the Wolf's Son, champion of King Håkon. I have killed 30 men in single combat. I have never been defeated. There is a first time for everything. Bold words for a dead man, Erik spurred his horse forward, and his army roared their approval. This was the old way, the way of the sagas. Two champions meeting in battle while armies watched. Winner take all. Kjartan waited as the champion charged up the slope. He watched the rhythm of the horse's hooves, the angle of Erik's blade, the slight favor in his left leg that suggested an old wound. He catalogued everything in the span of 3 heartbeats. Then Erik was upon him, and the world became violence. They fought for what felt like hours. Erik was skilled, perhaps the most skilled opponent Kjartan had ever faced. His blade moved like lightning, probing defenses, testing weaknesses. Twice he nearly took Kjartan's head. 3 times his edge found flesh, opening cuts along Kjartan's arms and chest. But Kjartan had something Erik did not. He had something worth dying for. On the 100th exchange, Kjartan saw his opening. He let Erik's blade slice across his shoulder, accepting the wound in exchange for position. Winter's End swept upward, caught the champion beneath the chin, and ended the legend of Erik the Wolf's son in a spray of crimson. The southern army fell silent. Kjartan turned to face them, blood pouring from a dozen wounds, his sword still raised. Who is next? They came all at once. 10,000 warriors surged up the pass, abandoning honor for numbers, deciding that no single man could stop an army. And they were right. No single man could. But Kjartan had never planned to fight alone. He retreated into the narrow gorge, drawing the first wave after him. 50 men squeezed into a space designed for 10, stumbling over each other in their eagerness to kill the legendary Doombringer. They did not see the oil that had been poured across the rocks. They did not notice the torches positioned along the cliff walls. Kjartan reached the first marker and dropped behind a boulder. Above him, a monk named Brother Aldrich touched fire to the oil, and the gorge became an inferno. Screams echoed off the mountain walls. Men burned alive, their armor cooking them from the inside. Those who tried to retreat found their path blocked by soldiers still pushing forward. The narrow pass became a slaughterhouse. But the southern army was vast, and fire could only kill so many. The second wave pushed through the ashes of the first, more cautious now, shields raised against flames that had already guttered out. Kjartan triggered the first avalanche. Tons of rock cascaded down the mountainside, burying hundreds in an instant. The pass shook with the impact, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire mountain might collapse. But the stones settled, leaving a barrier of rubble that the southerners would have to climb. They climbed it anyway, dying by the dozens, but climbing. For 3 hours, Kjartan held the pass. He used every trap, every trick, every desperate stratagem he had prepared. Rock slides and fire, ambushes from hidden positions, a narrow bridge that collapsed when the enemy was halfway across. He fought until his sword arm went numb, until his vision blurred with blood loss, until his body moved on pure will alone. And still, they came. By midday, Kjartan had retreated to the final defensive position, a narrow ledge overlooking the monastery. Behind him, Eira waited with the monks. Before him, 3,000 survivors of the southern army gathered for the final assault. This was the end. He had known it would come. He had simply hoped to take more of them with him. Kjartan raised his sword one last time, preparing to die on his feet. And then he heard the horns. They came from the east, a sound that made the southern soldiers turn in confusion. Over the ridge came wave after wave of warriors, their shields bearing the sigil of the Iron Coast. At their head rode Ragnhild, her raven cloak streaming behind her like wings of shadow. "Did you think I would let you die alone, Doombringer?" she called out as her cavalry smashed into the enemy flank. "You still owe me a war." What followed was not a battle, it was a reckoning. Caught between Kjartan's mountain fortress and Ragnhild's fresh troops, the southern army crumbled. Those who tried to flee found the passes blocked by their own dead. Those who surrendered were granted mercy. Those who kept fighting found none. By sunset, it was over. Kjartan sat on a blood-soaked rock, watching the enemy standards fall one by one. Ragnhild approached him with a skin of water and a cloth for his wounds. "How did you know?" he asked. "I did not need to read your message to know where you were going." She sat beside him, her own armor dented and scarred from the battle. A father protecting his daughter. There was never any other choice you could have made. The main army, Defeated yesterday at the Battle of Iron Fields, your strategy worked. King Håkon is dead, and the Southern Alliance is broken. She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. You saved us all, Kjartan, even when you were trying to save only one. Footsteps approached from behind. Small footsteps, hesitant but determined. Papa? Kjartan turned. Eira stood at the edge of the ledge, her wooden doll clutched in her hands, her mother's eyes wide with tears. Papa, you're hurt. I know. He opened his arms. Come here. She ran to him and he held her against his chest, feeling her small heart beating against his own. The pain of his wounds faded. The weight of the dead lightened. For one perfect moment, there was only his daughter, warm and safe and alive. I was scared, she whispered. I was so scared you would not come back. I told you, little one. He kissed the top of her head. I will always come back. That winter, Kjartan the Doombringer became Kjartan the Guardian, defender of the northern passes, hero of the monastery battle. He built a new home near the mountains where he could watch over both his daughter and his people. He trained warriors not to kill, but to protect. He taught them that true strength was not in taking lives, but in preserving them. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would pour 2 horns of mead and sit alone by the fire. 1 horn for himself, 1 for the dying berserker who had changed everything with a simple request. You were right, Viggo, he would whisper to the empty chair. Kindness is a blade, but some blades are worth wielding. Eira grew tall and strong. She learned to read, to heal, to lead. She never knew the full truth of her father's past, but she knew that he had once been lost and had found his way home. And that was enough. That was more than enough. And so ends the saga of Kjartan the Guardian, who gave mead to a dying man and found his redemption in the flames of war. But stories of the North never truly end. They echo through time. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, subscribe, and click the video on your screen for another unforgettable saga. See you in the next story.